What's up, guys? It's Chelsea Coleman here of Dauntless Performance Horses, and today is the day you've all been waiting for. Today is the day where we deep dive into Dauntless Authority, a.k.a. Gator. So let's get started.
Our champion now will be Chelsea Coleman, Dauntless Courage.
So, I have a confession to make. I have lied to you guys, and I have to apologize. Gator is not 10, he is 11. He is a 2012, not a 2013. So, I'm sure someone will pick up on that. So, I just figured I'd get out of the way. So, the story of Dauntless Authority started with me about 6 years ago. I got a phone call from someone who was a friend of mine at the time who's a trainer, and she said, hey, do you want to go in together on a horse? I said, sure, let's do it. She said, I have the perfect one. We're picking him up on the backside of Keeneland tomorrow. I said, perfect, let's do it. So we get to Keeneland, we pull around back to the backside of the track, and what we found was a very lame horse. When I say very lame, I mean he could barely walk. When you pick a horse up off the backside of Keeneland, essentially the backside of Keeneland is the barn, right? So track side is at the starting rails or the rails, and you can watch them breeze and whatever. The backside of Keeneland is where all the magic happens. So where the horses get taken care of, where they're stabled, where they're fed, all that stuff. So on the backside of Keeneland, you see a lot of lame horses. Horses off the racetrack get what we call track soreness. So track soreness is essentially sore feet, sore body from doing a lot of work on the racetrack. Now, these horses are primarily, when they're boarded at Keeneland, they're out on the racetrack and they work. They do their, anywhere between 15 to 30-minute works every day or 6 days a week. Each trainer is a little different. And then they go stand in a stall. Now, when you stand in your stall after you work, you get what's called lactic acid buildup. So it's very common for horses to come off the racetrack and be really lame or sore. But he was beyond that. Like, he could barely walk. He was buckling at the knees. It was bad. He was in great condition. But when the trainer pulled us aside, he said, hey, this horse has been fast shod. Now, what fast shod is where they take the foot and they cut the toe off. They make it super square, and what that does is it creates a soreness in the foot, which the theory behind that, it's a very old school technique and it's not humane. It was not done on purpose. The trainer did not know that was happening. The farrier had just done that. There was a miscommunication. But the concept behind fast shodding is their feet hurt so bad it makes them run faster because they don't want to be on their feet. So if you can imagine a runner running when their feet hit the ground, right? If your feet hurt, you're going to want to spend as little time as possible with your feet on the ground. So in horses having four legs, typically when they're running and they're fast shod or their feet hurt, they run a bit faster. Whereas in our event horses, when they're leg sore or body sore, we see them run a little bit slower because that's a stiffness thing. That's why he was lame. But we knew he probably had a little bit of track soreness as well. So the deal was we needed to get him home, rehab him, and then we could sell him. Now, unfortunately, the trainer that went in with me on him was a little dirty, and she sold him about 3 hours after we got him for free off the racetrack. Long story short, I ended up taking ownership of him. My mom actually ended up taking ownership of him because there was some shadiness going on with that trainer. So we got him home. He was not sound. We took care of him. We rehabbed him. At that point, the other trainer still had ownership in him. She had been reprimanded for selling a horse that she got for free because that's dirty and we don't do that. You can sell a horse you got for free, but not within 3 hours of getting it when you know the horse is lame. We got the horse back home. We got Gator back home. Sorry, you're not the horse. We got Gator back home. I named him Gator, as we discussed before. His name was long ago. That's silly. He needs a pet name. His pet name's Gator. Gave him his name. We had him in a stall. We put him out in the field at night with blanket on, kept him nice and warm, leg wraps on to make sure his legs are protected. He's pretty thick bone for a thoroughbred, but he still has pretty tight legs, so What I mean by that is he doesn't have a lot of meat in his legs. It's skin on bone, which is nice. We love to see that. That's how we knew he didn't have an injury, a tendon injury. But we kept him wrapped up being out with the other horses just to make sure he didn't get hurt. So 3 months go by, he's still not much more sound. We have a vet come out, we do more x-rays. We notice he's bad behind. Now, track soreness you see primarily in the hind end, and what you'll see is what we call high hocks. So they'll get really high hocked behind, and we almost kind of describe it as if you're running, and when a running technique that people do is kick your butt. So when you run, you kick your butt with your heel. And that's essentially what Gator looked like. He was like hitting himself in the butt with his own hocks. That lasted for about 3 months. So we were like, something's not right here. We had the vet come out, we looked into his legs, we x-rayed both his hind legs, and we found a fracture. When we contacted the owner, she said, yes, he had broken the left hind, but he fractured the right hind. So at that point, that's when we found out he had fractured / he broke one tibia, the left hind, and fractured the right hind tibia. The right tibia. So from that point forward, we knew, okay, this is going to be a little bit longer of a process. That is the point in which the other trainer exited stage left because she didn't want to pay for the rehab. At that point, my mom said, I will pay for it. I want him. The last race he won was on October 16th, which is my mom's birthday. So that's why she wanted him, because she's a superstitious person. She also believes in that kind of fate stuff. So she took ownership and she said to me, hey, we can own him 50-50. If you board him, I'll pay his medical bills and his farrier stuff and you can show him whatever. So that's what we did. So once we found out about the broken legs, we dug a little bit deeper into his racing career. That's when we found out that he raced for quite a long time, which we didn't know why previously, but we figured out that's because he broke his legs. Now, he broke both his back legs, then he was rehabbed for an entire year and then went back out to race again. He won every race he ran after he broke his legs and rehabbed. And we did some research on that because that's not typical. One, it's not typical for people to pay to rehab their racehorses and run them at a later age because everyone wants to go to the Derby and the Triple Crown. Most race trainers, if they have a horse, or owners, if they have a horse that isn't going to make it to the Derby, they, chuck him out, whatever. But his owner loved him a lot. He was the favorite in the barn, the training barn. So they invested the time and money and care into him. They rehabbed him impeccably, and then they sent him out and he raced again. He won $105,000, I believe, which makes him a war horse. A war horse is a horse that has either raced X amount of times or won X amount of money. So the fact that he became a war horse, I think he only ran 15 races. And he won that much money. And he won that money after he broke his back legs. So to dig a little deeper into that, we asked our vets and said, what is that? How is it that this horse was slow, broke his legs, then came back stronger? And the theory we've come up with is that he likely had OCDs in both tibias. Now, OCD is basically like in very simple terms, it's kind of like a hole in the bone. Now, it's not a hole in the bone like something punctured the bone. It's essentially the bone never filled in a certain area. It's a weak spot in the bone. When a horse has an OCD, especially in a place like the tibia, it's possible that he felt some instability there. So that could be possibly why he didn't run as quick before he broke his back legs. Once he broke his back legs and he healed, the bone filled in, it became more dense, and then he felt secure in his hind legs, and that's why, potentially, our theory is why he ran quicker, he had quicker clock times, and he won a lot of money. For everybody who has horses with OCDs and gets kind of worried about that, you can come back from it, and they are something that you need to pay attention to, because if you can address it and handle the situation, you can end up in a spot like Gator. Now, Gator, unfortunately, because of our theory behind the OCDs, that's essentially why he broke his legs, because that bone was very brittle and hadn't filled in and wasn't dense enough to carry the weight and the workload that he was being asked to do. Typically in the OCDs, you find them in really young horses, and when you're x-raying horses at the sales, you'll see that pop up on an x-ray. So always x-ray your horses. But remember, read the horse, not the x-ray. OCD is a little bit different. because it's not necessarily something they can all feel. It is important to look into that. And ultimately, the reason why Gator was retired, one, he was older. He retired at the age of 5. And 2, he was a bleeder. So you'll hear in some of the videos of him being ridden, he does what we call, he roars, which sounds like when he moves. That is a paralyzed flap in his throat. And essentially what happens is it gets in the way and it doesn't open all the way. So when he's breathing in and out, it's hitting that paralyzed flap, and that's where that sound's coming from. There's things you can do to fix that, such as tie-back surgery, which is basically they go in with a suture and they suture it open. Those don't typically hold forever. Anytime they have a big, what they call a big blowout. So if they're running a big long race, or if you're running, you know, the 5-star at Kentucky and you have a horse that has had tie-back surgery, typically after 2 or 3 of those big runs, you'll pop the stitch and the paralyzed flap will be loose again. The other thing you can do is go in with a laser and you can cauterize it and remove that flap. We have opted not to do any of that to him yet because he recovers really, really well. Thank you to our sponsors for that, because ever since he's been on the Smart Earth Camelina oil, that has helped a ton. Anything you can give him for inflammation will help with that. Now, it's not gonna fix it, but it will help with it. Also, the flare strips are a great thing to put on. Anytime he does gallops or canter sets or jumping, we like to put a flare strip on. It's essentially a breathe right strip for the horse's nose. It goes right here, and it allows them to really get a full breath in and all that oxygen to go to their lungs. So we love that. Another thing you can do is nebulizer. EquiRespi system is a little portable nebulizer that you can put on your horses, and you put solution in a cup, and it essentially, the system runs and it allows them to breathe in good, nice, soothing chemicals, not really chemicals, but if you want to think of it as chemicals, to help soothe the lungs and the esophagus and everything internally. So that is ultimately why he retired. He ran his last race, October 16th, won, and then they said, you know what? He's done too much for us. He bled, and we're going to retire him off of that. When I first got him, he was really, really tough. And when I say tough, I mean, once he got to the point where he could be ridden, this horse liked to bolt, and he's not much of a rearer, but he does a very strange, he would tuck his butt, bolt, and leap through the air. Anytime you touch the bridle and the contact, he'd just flip his head up and he'd bolt. But it is important to note that, especially on off-the-track thoroughbreds, they don't understand contact in the bridle in the same way that your seasoned sport horse would. With thoroughbreds, when they feel contact, they typically lean and go a little bit quicker, and when you soften the contact and you add gappiness to your reins is when they relax and they quiet down. That was worked through after a few months. He went on and packed a kit around for his first few horse shows, and then I started competing him. Now, one of my favorite things about this horse is he's very mechanical, which you'll see in the videos. He's very intentional and mechanical with his movement. So it's very rhythmical, it's very workable, and it's very portable. And by portable, I mean, I can say, I want your forearm here, I want your knee here, and I want your toe here. And you can feel every single bit of that because of how mechanical he is. Now, he's not a horse that's going to be super fluid. It's pretty, but it's pretty in a different way. It's pretty, he's pretty because of the mechanical side of him, or the mechanical aspect of him makes him look very intentional. So everything he does looks like he's doing it with a purpose, right? As far as fluidity goes, he's not going to be the horse that goes around and just looks like he's floating on air. He is still pretty nonetheless. He's also a great horse to teach people on because he's so mechanical. If you don't know how to post, or you're not good at lead changes or anything like that, because of the way he moves his body and he's so intentional about how he moves his body, it's very easy for you to go, okay, that's what this is supposed to feel like. You can feel every rhythm, every step, every gait, every foot, every beat, which is pretty unique, especially for a horse like him who's built, as we said, very downhill, like a skid steer. Horses already carry 70% of their body weight up front. So when you have a horse that carries that much weight up front and they're downhill, you go from 70% up front to about 90% up front is what it feels like. And so that can be tricky. And typically with horses like that, you don't get a lot of knee action. You get a lot of scraping action, they'll drag their toe and whatnot. Gator is unique in the sense that he has a lot of knee action, a lot of hock action, and he's got a really pretty step. One of my favorite things about Gator is he lets you know how he's feeling and why he's feeling that way. So the flip side to that is a horse like this can get scared, which is why he has not gone preliminary yet. I've said in a couple of videos he's ready to move up to preliminary. Now, he's been ready to move up to preliminary for about a year. The reason why he hasn't is because it's very important to keep a horse like this who's very much on the emotional side. It's important for him to know exactly what he's doing, exactly what he's capable of, and to learn what he likes and what he doesn't like. So for instance, he's not a stopper, but what he does do if he's anxious or he's nervous, he'll get about 3 strides out and he'll suck back. And if you put your leg on and push him through, he panics, right? He'll go, but then the next time you come back to your fence, he gets a little anxious. So with him, when you feel him back off, you kind of have to do the opposite, which is uncomfortable for people. You have to soften your hand, put your leg on and say, I'm here if you have any questions, and allow him to figure it out. So there was a little situation with him about a year ago where he went cross-country schooling with a very well-known professional, and he was pushed a little hard. And he got a little nervous and he started stopping at skinnies in some of the corners. For example, if Dante were to do that, I would make sure I went and cross-country schooled him for 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row. When that happened with Gator and he started to stop, I got him over the fences and then I put him up for the day, and he did not cross-country school for 1 month. It's important with a horse like this to allow him to forget what he's afraid of. And that is going to be very controversial with a lot of people. But this horse worries about so many things. If you constantly readdress his fear, he will come up with more reasons why he should be afraid of it. So the best thing to do, this horse in particular, is when you know he's afraid of a certain type of fence or a certain water. He was very scared of water at first. So he spent many months not going into the water, just walking by the water and not addressing it. Then we finally got to the point where we'd go cross-country schooling and he'd watch all the other horses jump off the water and I wouldn't let him go. And he's like, well, I want to go. Then it got to the point a couple sessions after that, he was like, well, I want to go to the water. And he was dragging me to the water. Since then, he's one of the best horses in water I've ever had. He loves to jump into water. He'll jump a fence into water, a bank into water, out of water, through water, underwater, over water, around water. Doesn't care. Water's his thing, which is ironic because his name's Gator. But that's a little interesting, unique piece about him, is making sure that if you find that he's overly worried about something, you've got to step away from it and take it out of his line of sight and take it out of his mind. Because if you overly school this horse, like I said, he is what we would consider, if he was a person, he would be very, very, very paranoid, and he would be on a couple different medications for it, because he is a worrier. He worries. If another horse looks at him in the paddock, he squeals and runs. He's not the horse that wants to stand right up next to another horse. He doesn't have a best friend that he wants to be next to all the time. He's very anxious and very self-aware. So as far as what he's doing now, he is competed training level for about a year and a half. He's done competitions all over. He's competed in Florida, Virginia, Tennessee, Indiana, Kentucky, obviously, Pennsylvania. He's gone everywhere. He's seen about everything he needs to see. He's a super solid citizen. His show jumping has gotten quite a bit better. He's always been good at the show jumping, but he's a very unorthodox jumper. This horse will oftentimes jump behind the shoulder, which means his knees don't come up in front of his shoulder. He jumps with his forearm and his knees behind the point of his shoulder. Now that is not, you don't want the horses to jump like that. That's how you get rotational falls. So it's important with him to work on that. Now, the part that needs to be addressed there is he's got to get quicker with his knees and his forearms, but he also, what's interesting about him is he doesn't tuck his toes a ton. A lot of the rails he's had, he hangs his toes, so he'll pick his feet up like this, but he leaves his toes dangling instead of going boop. So that's something that we work on quite often, do a lot of grid work, a lot of solid cross-country fences, not because I want him to hit them, but because I want him to not rely on the fact that the poles are going to just fall down all the time. He is quite good on the flat if you ride him right. He's very flexible, he's very movable. Because of that, you've got to make sure you ride the whole horse. If I'm not riding the head of the horse, he'll literally, oh my gosh, I woke him up. He'll literally have a head tilt like this if I'm not making sure that I'm riding pole to tail, right? So keeping him straight this way, it can be difficult sometimes. Sometimes he'll go down center line with a little bit of a head tilt and tilt his nose up, or he'll bow out through his neck, or he'll dive out through his shoulder, or he'll put his haunches in or haunches out, or he won't use his rib cage. So it's important with a horse like this, and it's tricky with a horse like this, because if you can either lay down a 20 or you can lay down a 40. Also a little bit why he hasn't moved up yet, because for me, there's no point in moving up to preliminary if I haven't fine-tuned every aspect of the 3 events that he has to do. Now the cross country, solid. No issues there. He's quick, he's comfortable, he's happy, he's great at it. Show jumping, the bigger the fences get, the better he jumps. But again, he's unorthodox, so we have to keep an eye on that to make sure we don't ever put him in a position where we're pushing him past his limit. I think this horse could easily jump around advance, not an issue. The cross country will be a confidence test because he is a timid horse and he does get startled. I would never want to put him in a situation where he's running cross country and a fence scares him. The show jumps, not an issue. Like I said, the dressage is the deciding factor for the move up and the consistency. Couple little fun facts about Gator. He oftentimes get what we call the Gator zoomies, and it's quite literally what it sounds like. Even when a dog gets the zoomies and he tucks his tail and he runs around. Gator, as I stated earlier, is not a horse that loves to be next to other horses, but every few months he gets this wild hair up his rear and he decides that he wants to go play bitey face with every horse in the field. The mean horses, the quiet horses, the old horses, the young horses, all of them. He did that this morning. It was quite funny. He'll just go up to each horse and just go boop and start picking. And then they get irritated and he looks them straight in the face. He rears straight up in the air and he'll strike out like this. He's almost flipped over backwards about 100 times out in the paddock. So that's kind of a fun little, we know Gator's in a good headspace when he gets the Gator zoomies. His absolute favorite treat on the planet is carrots and peppermints. If this horse hears a peppermint wrapper or hears the snap of a carrot, you've won his heart. Loves it. He is a little bit of a picky eater, which is kind of an interesting fact. You're never going to see him super round and fat. He just doesn't have that body type, and it took us a long time to lock down a feeding program for him because he is kind of picky. As far as supplements goes, he gets the Smart Earth Camelina oil. He gets the NupaFeed L-carnitine. He gets all the Vitalize line. So he gets the Free Choice pellet, the protein pellet, the Digest More Plus, the Hyaluronics, and the Almond. So he gets all of that. He also gets the horse paste before and after horse shows, trailering, cross-country schoolings, anything that could cause stress. As far as food goes, he gets Tri-Fiber Compete, which is a low-starch feed from Excel Feed. I love that feed. It's a complete feed. It's got hay in it, lots of forage. It's really tasty, but it's not packed full of sugar, so it doesn't upset his tummy. Another interesting fact about him is he broke his tongue on the racetrack. So that's actually pretty common, which I did not know that was even possible. But thoroughbreds get a lot of times what's called a shiftney bit, which is essentially, it's flat on top and round on bottom, and it goes right through their mouth over their tongue. And it presses against their tongue and it helps with control. It's essentially one step up from a chain shank. Those shiftneys are pretty sharp, and it's very common for when the horses act up and they yank down on the shiftneys to break their tongue. That's a little bit of a struggle. He wears a nath, which is just a flat piece of rubber, not plastic, but rubber, and it goes straight across the tongue. We've tried ports, so a port bit will raise up like that, and instead of pushing flat on the tongue, it doesn't touch the tongue. The issue with that is port bits are actually a little bit harsh, and they push on the roof of the mouth, which he doesn't need because he also has a low palate. So we can't put a port bit in his mouth because it pushes up on the top of his palate, which is painful. So that's a little bit tricky. That's where some of his head stuff comes from. We think that's where the bolting came from. We do have to keep an eye on that. I keep my rides pretty short on him because of that, especially dressage rides when he's in a lot of contact. But we've seemed to manage that pretty well, and I think we've got a pretty good handle on that. And in his spare time, he teaches lessons. He loves teaching lessons, and like I've said multiple times, he is the barn favorite. Everybody that comes to ride wants to ride Gator, and how could you not love him? He's the cutest little thing. Right, G? Yeah. Unfortunately for him, he has been dubbed Dante, a.k.a. Dauntless Courage's emotional support animal. When I tell you Dante comes unglued when Gator is not in his sight, I mean Dante comes unglued when Gator is not in his sight. Dante cannot be without Gator. In fact, he's probably directly behind me right now with his head over the fence staring at me. Not me, but Gator. It's not because he wants to be here doing this. It's because he's like, where is my gray thoroughbred? He is to report to me immediately. So poor Gator was forced into that role. He had no say in the matter. I had no say in the matter. Dante is the only one with an ability to have a say in that matter. Dante is not mean to Gator. He just doesn't want to touch Gator. He just needs to be able to see Gator and needs to be able to touch him should he want to. Oh yeah, he's back there somewhere. So poor Gator. If you're ever at a horse show and you hear a raging, screaming roar and I'm on this horse, it's 100% Dante back in the barn saying, where the heck is my Gator? Gator's unfortunate reality is he is Dante's emotional support animal. All right, guys, so that's all you need to know about our Gator boy. And we appreciate your love for him because he is very near and dear to our heart. If you have any more questions or if there's something you want to know about him that I didn't address, please leave it down below in the comments. We can't wait to share more stuff as his career moves on, and you're going to want to follow him because I have a lot of faith in this horse, and I think he's going to do some pretty cool things. So remember, it doesn't matter where you come from, it only matters where you're going, and he's living proof of that. So we'll see you next time.